Have you ever wondered why some men can't stop thinking about a woman, even when she doesn't try to impress, doesn't try to be loved, doesn't even try to stay? Not because she said the right words, not because she played a perfect game, but because something about her made him lose control of his emotions, his expectations, his sense of power. And that's where the truth begins. A man doesn't fall for control. He falls for what disarms him. You might have lived this truth without realizing it. You gave everything. You were thoughtful, kind, always available. You listened. You waited. You tried to be enough. And still, he pulled away, vanished, faded like the echo of a promise never meant to last. And you asked yourself, what else could I have done? But maybe that was the problem. Maybe it was never about doing, never about trying, never about bending yourself just right to fit into the outline of someone else's desire. The truth is, some women don't need to try. They don't need to perform, to chase, to persuade. Their presence alone shifts the room. Their silence says more than their words ever could. And without lifting a finger, they become unforgettable. He doesn't fall for the woman who plays the role well. He falls for the one who doesn't play at all. The paradox is sharp. The less she tries to be loved, the more magnetic she becomes. The less she needs him, the more he's drawn in. Not because she pushes, but because she doesn't. This isn't manipulation. It's not a tactic. It's not playing hard to get. It's alignment. It's the quiet power of a woman who belongs to herself, who has stopped auditioning for love and started living from the truth of who she is. There is something undeniably powerful about a woman who cannot be controlled, not because she rebels, but because she simply doesn't fit inside anyone's box. She doesn't shrink to be accepted. She doesn't soften herself to make others feel comfortable. She shows up whole, wild, honest, and that kind of presence, it shakes the ground beneath a man's feet. It stirs something he thought he buried a long time ago. Carl Jung once said that what we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. When a man meets a woman who lives fully in her truth, who no longer needs to be chosen to feel worthy, it activates something deep within him. It's not attraction, it's awakening, because she doesn't just enter his life, she enters his psyche. She doesn't demand attention, but he can't stop thinking about her, not because she was loud, but because her stillness held a mirror to everything he'd lost in himself. And maybe that's the real reason why some women haunt the hearts of men long after they've gone. Because they didn't ask to be remembered. They just lived in a way that couldn't be forgotten. You don't have to beg for love. You don't have to twist yourself into something smaller, softer, more manageable. You don't have to be chosen. Because the moment you stop trying to be the one he wants, you become the one he can't forget. This is not about becoming someone else. It's about returning to yourself. The woman you were before you learned to please, to prove, to earn affection like a prize. The woman who once walked into a room, not wondering if she was enough, but simply knowing that she was the whole damn storm. And maybe, just maybe, that's the woman he'll never be able to control. And that's exactly why he'll fall. She was always the one who tried. She learned how to soften her voice, to be agreeable, to keep the peace. She anticipated needs before they were spoken. She gave more chances than she should have. She stayed longer than was healthy. She convinced herself that love meant effort, and if it wasn't working, maybe she just wasn't trying hard enough. She twisted herself into shapes that didn't fit, just to hold on to someone who couldn't see her. And every time she gave her all, she watched it happen again. The same slow fade, the same unexplained distance, the same sense of confusion settling into her chest like fog. Why do you always fall for men who lose interest the moment you give your all? It's a quiet torment. You start strong. There's chemistry, connection, possibility. And then, as soon as you start to trust it, as soon as you lean in a little more, they retreat. They become colder, distracted, disconnected, and you wonder what changed, what you did wrong, what part of you became suddenly less lovable. So you try harder. You double the affection. You over-explain. You apologize for being too much, too emotional, too available. You shrink, hoping it will make him stay, but it never works. And if you're honest with yourself, you've lived this pattern more than once. Different faces, same silence, same heartbreak. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This isn't just bad luck. This isn't random. It's a reflection of something deeper, something inside you that keeps playing out an old story, hoping for a different ending. Somewhere along the way, you learned that love must be earned, that being chosen requires performance, that your value is measured in how much you can give. You were taught that if you loved someone enough, they would love you back. But that's the illusion, because love isn't a transaction, and the right man doesn't require a performance. He doesn't need you to prove your worth. He just needs you to be rooted in it. The ones who pull away when you give your heart are not rejecting you. They're rejecting the part of themselves that cannot receive real love, the part that's still chasing thrill, control, distraction. It's not about you being too much. It's about them not being ready. But there's another truth, a harder one. Sometimes, the moment you begin to need him, the moment you reach, he stops reaching for you. Not because you did anything wrong, but because what drew him in was never your effort. It was your wholeness, your autonomy, your quiet power. And when that began to fade, when you started to orbit around his attention, the gravity broke. So maybe it's time to ask a different question. Maybe he didn't fall for the version of you who gave everything. Maybe he fell for the version of you who didn't need to be loved. The one who was centered, mysterious, grounded. The one who wasn't trying to be picked, but who simply showed up as herself. And maybe, just maybe, when you started trying to be loved, he no longer recognized you. Because your trying came from fear, from lack, from the shadowed belief that you are only worthy when you are wanted. But what if the truth is that your deepest power is not in your effort, but in your essence? What if the part of you that needs to be chosen is the part still healing, and the part of you that knows she doesn't need to beg is the part that's finally waking up? This is not about blaming yourself. It's about understanding, seeing the pattern for what it is, the loop that repeats until we name it, face it, heal it, because you don't have to chase anymore. You don't have to convince anyone of your worth. You were never too much. You were just with someone who couldn't hold what you carried. And the next time you feel that urge to try harder, to win him back, to prove your value, pause. Ask yourself, who are you doing this for? And who would you be if you stopped trying? That answer might just be the beginning of everything real, everything lasting, everything you've been searching for. Not out there, but here within. Carl Jung believed that deep within every man lies an image, an idealized feminine essence shaped not by logic, but by the unconscious. He called it the Anima, and it is not merely a psychological concept. It is a force, an ancient pattern that determines how a man connects, desires, and falls in love. The Anima is not interested in predictability. It is not impressed by compliance or performance. What it seeks is resonance, depth, mystery, a glimpse of something it cannot name but feels drawn to with every fiber of its being. This is why a man often falls hardest for the woman he cannot control. Not because she plays games or withholds affection, but because she touches something inside him he didn't even know was missing. She reminds him of something long forgotten, a part of himself buried beneath conditioning and ego, and in her presence, it begins to stir. She doesn't try to impress. She doesn't ask for permission to be herself. She doesn't adapt her essence to fit the room, and because of that, she becomes unforgettable. A woman who lives from her soul doesn't need to chase, and because of that, everything begins to chase her. This is not romantic idealism. It is energetic reality, because feminine energy, at its core, is not submission. It is not performative gentleness. It is not the shell of politeness wrapped in fear of rejection. True feminine energy is presence. It is authenticity. It is the quiet refusal to betray oneself just to be accepted. We live in a world that has long misunderstood the feminine. It has told women to be nice, agreeable, pleasing, but none of those things are the same as feminine power. In fact, many of them are the opposite, because when a woman disconnects from her truth to please others, her energy becomes diluted. She becomes readable, predictable, manageable. But when she returns to herself, when she begins to act from alignment rather than anxiety, her energy shifts. She stops performing and starts radiating. And that shift is not subtle. Men notice, not with their minds, but with something deeper. Because what draws a man in is not understanding her. It is the inability to fully define her. Men don't fall for women they understand. They fall for women who awaken something they forgot inside. This is the essence of anima projection. A man projects his unconscious feminine onto a woman who embodies qualities he hasn't yet integrated. She feels like a portal to something sacred, something powerful, and because he doesn't fully understand it, he can't stop thinking about it. The mistake many women make is believing they need to explain themselves, to justify, to be logical. But love, at this level, isn't born in logic, it's born in frequency. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be the most beautiful woman in the room. You only need to be the most present with yourself. That presents the one that comes from knowing who you are, from not abandoning yourself for the comfort of others. That is the energy he can't resist, because it doesn't ask to be loved. It doesn't demand to be chosen. It simply exists, and that existence pulls everything toward it. The feminine that no longer begs to be seen becomes impossible to ignore. So ask yourself, are you trying to be understood? Or are you brave enough to be deeply yourself, even when no one else gets it? Because your depth is not the problem. It's the portal. And when you begin to embody the truth of who you are, without softening your edges to make others comfortable, you become something rare, a mirror, a catalyst, a frequency that reminds him of the soul he forgot he had. This is not about seduction. It is not about strategy. It is about liberation. And the woman who is free within herself will always stir something uncontrollable in the man who has yet to free himself. That is the anima. That is why he falls. Not because you tried to be lovable, but because you dared to be real. Let's face the truth, most people are too afraid to say out loud. The more you try to please him, the more invisible you become. You thought giving more would deepen the connection. You thought loving harder would make him see your worth. So you stayed up late to comfort him. You said yes when your body screamed no. You apologized for feelings that were never wrong. You overgave, over-explained, overextended, and in return, he gave you uncertainty, silence, confusion. You gave him everything, and he gave you confusion. Not clarity, not devotion, not presence. This isn't just personal, it's systemic. You were raised in a world that taught you to be pleasing before powerful, to smile when uncomfortable, to stay small in order to be safe. You were taught that your worth is determined by how much others approve of you. But here's the brutal irony. The very things you were taught would make you lovable compliance, sweetness, predictability, the very things that make you forgettable. Because here's what no one told you. He doesn't crave what he can control. He's not drawn to your obedience. He's drawn to your unpredictability, to your wildness, to the part of you that doesn't bend just to keep the peace. That doesn't beg. That doesn't ask for permission to exist. You've been told your softness is your power. And yes, softness has beauty. But not when it's rooted in fear. Not when it's the result of shrinking, silencing, sacrificing who you are. Real power is not how nicely you speak. It's how deeply you know your own voice. Carl Jung once wrote, "The feminine that is most feared is the one that cannot be tamed." That fear is real. Not just for men, for society. Because a woman who is no longer looking for permission cannot be manipulated. She doesn't ask, "Am I good enough?" She asks, "Is this true for me?" She doesn't twist herself into palatable shapes. She brings her full self into the room and lets others adjust. And that kind of presence, it terrifies people who have only ever loved the version of you they could control. Here's the wake-up call. The man who leaves when you stop trying is not your loss. He is your mirror. He reveals the parts of you that still believe love must be earned. When you chase, you lose your gravity. When you overgive, you dilute your presence. When you make yourself small to keep someone, you end up losing the only thing that made you magnetic, your truth. You were never meant to be agreeable. You were meant to be alive. So if you feel like he pulled away when you showed your soul, understand this. He didn't walk away because you were too much. He walked away because your depth required a kind of presence he didn't have the capacity to meet. It's not your job to soften your brilliance, to accommodate someone else's blindness. Let that sink in. The feminine that cannot be tamed is not chaotic. She is clear. She no longer bends for breadcrumbs. She no longer entertains maybes. She no longer asks how to be more likable. She asks how to be more aligned. And because of that, she becomes unforgettable. Not for what she gives, but for what she no longer needs to prove. So if you've been told that you need to try harder, love louder, wait longer, stop. You are not here to convince someone to see your worth. You are here to embody it, to live it, to let it speak in every room you enter without uttering a word. Because when you return to the core of who you are, something shifts. You stop chasing. You stop shrinking. You stop waiting for love to find you. And you realize it was always you, the one they couldn't hold, the one they couldn't tame, the one they couldn't forget. She walks into the room, and nothing looks different. She says nothing dramatic. She doesn't demand attention. She doesn't wear anything loud. But somehow, everything changes. The air shifts. People pose. Eyes follow. It's not beauty that stops them. It's not charm. It's something else. Something deeper. An unspoken energy that makes everyone present feel a little more aware, a little more alive. This is the power of a woman who no longer needs to be saved. She doesn't move with arrogance. She moves with clarity. She's not cold. She's simply self-contained. And that's where the magnetism begins. Because when a woman no longer looks outward for validation, she becomes unshakable. And that is what makes her irresistible. Carl Jung captured this essence when he said, "It is not her words, but her soul's frequency." This frequency is not taught. It's not performed. It's remembered. It awakens when a woman finally stops asking, "What do they want from me?" and starts asking, "What do I want from myself?" It awakens when she stops chasing love and starts living from love. It awakens when she realizes her strength isn't in how much she can give, but in how deeply she can stay true. We've been sold a lie. That being wanted is the goal. That being chosen is the reward. that our worth is confirmed by someone else's attention. But what if the goal was never to be chosen? What if the real power was to become someone who no longer needs to be? Because the woman who cannot be controlled is the one who is truly free, and freedom is magnetic. There is a myth that a woman like this is hard to love, that she is distant, cold, intimidating. But none of that is true. She is not distant. She is discerning. She is not cold. She is rooted. She is not intimidating. She simply refuses to shrink. She doesn't raise her voice to be heard. Her silence speaks volumes. She doesn't explain herself. Her energy does that for her. When you are in her presence, you feel something shift, not because she's trying to impress, but because she's deeply present, with herself, with the moment, with everything that matters. She doesn't seek attention, but attention finds her, because presence is the new seduction, and no amount of strategy can replicate the gravity of someone who has come home to herself. This is not about rejection. This is about return, a return to wholeness, to the self you were before you were taught to perform, before you were told to be sweet, soft, small, before you learned to trade truth for acceptance. Now, you remember. You remember the woman who doesn't need tactics, who doesn't need to chase, who doesn't ask for approval, because she is not performing anymore. She is becoming. And in that becoming, she stops being controllable. Because to be uncontrollable is not to be rebellious. It is to be true. True to your rhythms, true to your boundaries, true to your voice, true to your soul's frequency. And that is the energy he cannot forget. That is what makes a man pause, reflect, and feel something he can't name. Not desire, not lust, something older, something sacred. He doesn't understand why he's drawn to her. He only knows that he is, because she reminds him of something lost in himself, a truth he has yet to meet, a wholeness he has yet to embody. That's not seduction, that's remembrance. And it only happens in the presence of someone who is fully themselves. So, if you've been told to dim your light, to soften your power, to wait for permission stop, you don't need permission to be magnetic. You just need to be real. Because the woman who is real, who is whole, who is no longer seeking a savior, becomes the kind of woman the world cannot ignore. And she doesn't have to chase anything, because everything she needs rises to meet her. There is a quiet kind of power in a woman who has been through the fire and no longer fears being alone. Not because she gave up on love, but because she stopped abandoning herself to receive it. She is no longer the woman who waits to be chosen. She chooses herself, and that choice changes everything. When she no longer needs to be chosen, she becomes unforgettable. Carl Jung spoke of this transformation as individuation, the process of becoming whole, of facing what was hidden, of integrating the parts of ourselves we once denied, feared, or rejected. In Jungian psychology, this hidden territory is known as the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is not darkness for the sake of darkness. It is the collection of everything you were told not to be, everything you pushed away to be accepted, everything you learned to fear in yourself. Your anger, your power, your desire, your sadness, your intensity, your boundaries. For many women, the shadow holds all the parts of their identity that were labeled too much, too emotional, too assertive, too wild. So they buried it. They became agreeable, manageable, lovable in ways the world approved of. But love earned through self-erasure is not love. It is survival. And at some point, survival begins to feel like suffocation. That's when the journey begins. The journey inward, the return to the self, the descent into the shadow, not to be consumed by it, but to reclaim it. Because the truth is, no one is more radiant than a woman who has met her own darkness and refused to be ashamed of it. She doesn't pretend to be light all the time. She knows her storms. She knows her edges. And instead of hiding them, she honors them. She no longer needs to be perfect. She needs to be whole. This shift is subtle, but it is profound. She moves from neediness to presence, from chasing to choosing, from seeking approval to embodying her own authority. This is the essence of feminine maturity, not a woman who knows everything, but a woman who is no longer afraid of what she knows. She does not collapse into silence to keep the peace. She does not shrink in the presence of a man to feel protected. She does not perform softness to avoid being called difficult. She simply is. And because of that, she disrupts every dynamic built on insecurity. She becomes a mirror showing others not what they want to see, but what they have yet to face. For some, that is terrifying. For others, that is the most magnetic thing they've ever encountered. Because true feminine presence is not about being pleasing, it's about being real. It's the difference between "please love me" and "this is who I am." It's the shift from fear to freedom. And the woman who has walked through this transformation no longer fits inside traditional expectations. She doesn't chase, she attracts, not through tactics, but through essence. Not through manipulation, but through authenticity. Carl Jung wrote that the most powerful force in the psyche is the integration of the shadow. When a woman reclaims what she once hid, she becomes more than beautiful. She becomes whole. And wholeness is irresistible because it holds both softness and strength, tenderness and fire, stillness and wildness. She does not need to be either or. She can be all. That is the woman a man cannot control, cannot forget, and often cannot explain, because she does not awaken his desires. She awakens his depth. She touches not the surface, but the soul. And perhaps that is why the woman who chooses herself first, who welcomes her shadow, who lives from her center, does not need to be loud to be heard or visible to be felt. She simply is. And in being fully herself, she invites others to do the same. Not through demand, but through presence. Not through effort, but through being. That is what it means to be uncontrollable. That is what it means to be whole. She walks slowly down the street. No one is waiting for her. No one is calling her name. Yet there is no sense of emptiness in her step. No rush to arrive anywhere. She is not lonely. She is not searching. She is simply walking, present, whole, enough. There is a kind of silence around her that does not speak of absence, but of fullness. The kind of fullness that comes not from having everything, but from no longer needing anything to feel complete. She does not glance sideways, wondering who is watching. She does not fix her posture, hoping to be seen. She does not rehearse conversations in her mind. She walks with the calm certainty of someone who no longer performs her worth. And in that quiet presence, there is power. Your value was never in what you could give. It is in who you are when you give nothing at all. This is the shift, the sacred turning point. When the woman who once chased love, validation, attention, and approval suddenly realizes that the thing she was looking for was never outside her. It was always waiting within. Carl Jung wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." And awakening is not a loud process. It is not a sudden burst of clarity. It is a soft unraveling, a remembering, a return. The return to the self you were, before the world told you who to be, before you learned to trade truth for affection, before you believed you had to earn love through effort and sacrifice. Now, you remember that love was never something to be won. It was something to be lived. Not out there, but here, in you, through you. When you stop chasing, when you stop performing, when you stop trying to fit someone else's vision of who you should be, you begin to see clearly. You begin to feel what real alignment is. It is not the absence of longing. It is the presence of trust. Trust that you are not behind, not broken, not too much, or not enough. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. And from this place, you begin to live not from fear, but from freedom. You speak less, but say more. You need less, but feel more. You do less, but become more. Because your energy no longer leaks in 1,000 directions. It is centered, rooted, intact. And that is when everything starts to change. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped trying to be anything other than yourself. You wake up, not to a new version of yourself, but to the original one. The one who knew how to feel, how to trust, how to simply be. And from that space, your relationships change, your choices change, your boundaries become clearer, your silence becomes sacred, your presence becomes a gift, not a negotiation. You stop asking, "Am I lovable?" and start asking, "Is this love true to me?" You stop needing to be needed. You start loving from overflow, not depletion. You no longer lose yourself in someone else's story. You write your own. This is not the end of love. It is the beginning of true love. Love that does not demand you shrink. Love that does not fear your depth. Love that meets you where you are, because you are already there. This is the kind of transformation that cannot be undone. Because once you taste the freedom of not needing to be chosen, you will never again settle for being tolerated. Once you remember who you are without the layers of performance and pain, you will never again betray yourself to belong. You will walk like that woman, quiet, present, full, not because she has it all figured out, but because she no longer needs to. Her peace does not come from certainty, it comes from self-honesty. She knows where she ends and where others begin. She does not confuse attention for affection. She does not confuse presence with possession. She is not cold. She is clear. She is not waiting. She is here. And in her stillness, in her truth, in her undeniable presence, she becomes a beacon, not because she tried, but because she stopped trying. And from that place, everything she truly desires begins to find its way to her, not because she chased it, but because she became it.